The cost of EpiPens are on the rise. Families are being put in a tough spot as they routinely depend on the device to deliver life-saving medicine if their child has a bad reaction.
The cost of the epinephrine auto-injector has increased by almost 500% over the last 7 years. And joining us now is Martin Shkreli.
Martin Shkreli.
Martin Shkreli.
Martin Shkreli.
Martin Shkreli.
All of them, same week, same man. Martin Shkreli. None of them agreed on much, but they all agreed on one thing. This man was the enemy. What they didn't tell you, what nobody wanted to say out loud, is that he was also the only person in a decade who forced America to look at something it had been deliberately ignoring. This is the story of the most hated man in America, and why he was right. In September 2015, one man managed to make the entire internet agree on something. That almost never happens. His name is Martin Shkreli. He was 32 years old, and overnight, he became the most hated person in America. Not a war criminal, not a dictator, a pharmaceutical CEO who raised the price of a pill, one pill, from $13.50 to $750 overnight. A 5,000% increase on a drug that HIV patients needed to survive. The headlines wrote themselves. Congress called him to testify, and he sat there, smirking, and took the fifth on every single question. He called journalists parasites, bought a Wu-Tang Clan album for $2 million just because he could, and even live-streamed himself, playing video games and insulting viewers for hours at a time. America had its villain. Clean, simple, and photogenic, and that's exactly where the story gets complicated. To understand how Shkreli became Shkreli, you have to go back to the beginning, and the beginning is not what you'd expect. He grew up in Brooklyn, New York, the son of Albanian and Croatian immigrants. His parents were janitors. They were not wealthy. There was no safety net, no connections, and no legacy admission to an Ivy League school. But what he did have was a brain that worked differently to almost everyone around him. By his early teens, he was cold calling hedge funds and asking if he could shadow traders. One of them said yes. He was 17. By his mid-20s, he had founded his own hedge fund, and by his late 20s, he had founded a pharmaceutical company called Retrofin. And here's where his particular genius and his particular pathology first became visible. Shkreli had identified something real, something that the pharmaceutical industry had known for decades and quietly exploited without anyone making enough noise about it. Old, off-patent drugs that had existed for decades, that were no longer under protection, that should have been cheap, were being acquired by small companies and repriced at whatever the market would bear. Because in America, there is no law against that, none. Shkreli didn't invent this model, he didn't even perfect it, he just did it loudly, and that loudness would eventually cost him everything. But before the fall, there was the rise, and the rise was genuinely extraordinary. In 2015, Shkreli acquired the rights to Daraprim, a 62-year-old drug used to treat toxoplasmosis, a parasitic infection that can be fatal in HIV patients and people with compromised immune systems. The drug cost $13.50 per pill. It had cost roughly that for decades. But within 24 hours of the acquisition, he raised the price to $750 per pill. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. Hillary Clinton tweeted about it. Bernie Sanders sent letters to Congress. Every major news outlet ran the story. And Shkreli, rather than going quiet, hiring a PR firm, and issuing a careful statement, he did the opposite. He went on television and smirked. He called his critics uninformed. He said the price increase was necessary to fund research and development. He said other pharmaceutical companies did exactly the same thing, just without telling anyone. He said if people were angry at him, they should be angry at the entire system. And here, buried underneath the smirk, underneath the arrogance, underneath the spectacle, he was largely correct. Because the thing that made America hate Martin Shkreli wasn't actually unique to Martin Shkreli. In the same year he raised Daraprim's price, Valiant Pharmaceuticals raised the price of 2 heart drugs by 525% and 212% overnight. A company called Mallinckrodt raised the price of a drug for infant seizures from $40 a vial to $39,000 a vial. These companies did it quietly, with careful press releases, with corporate spokespeople trained to give measured answers. Nobody made them the most hated person in America. The difference was not what Shkreli did, the difference was how he made people feel while he did it. And this is where his psychology becomes genuinely fascinating, because Shkreli didn't just lack the filter that most people have, he had consciously removed it. He believed, with absolute conviction, that most people in positions of power were frauds, that they did bad things and dressed them up in a good language, that the pharmaceutical industry was a machine built to extract money from sick people, and that the executives running it were doing exactly what he was doing, just while pretending to care. In his mind, his honesty was a form of integrity. His smirk was not contempt for the public, it was contempt for the performance. But being right about a broken system does not give you the right to break people inside it. The HIV patients who couldn't afford Daraprim at $750 were not abstractions. They were not theoretical points in a debate about pharmaceutical pricing policies. They were real people, in real pain, caught inside a war between a man's ego and his ideology. Shkreli understood systems. He never quite understood people. Then came the fraud, and this is the part that most people know, but few people understand properly. The charges against Shkreli were not related to Daraprim. They were not related to drug pricing at all. They were securities fraud, specifically running what prosecutors described as a Ponzi-like scheme across 2 hedge funds and Retrofin, his first pharmaceutical company. The details were intricate. He had lost money for investors, hidden those losses, used company funds to pay back earlier investors, and then misled people about what was actually happening. It was a financial crime, not a healthcare crime. He was convicted in 2017, sentenced to 7 years, but served about 4 as he was released early for good behaviour. Since his release, Shkreli has continued doing what Shkreli does. He started a pharmaceutical company focused on rare diseases. He launched a platform claiming to disrupt the industry from within. He live streams, he argues, he is constitutionally incapable of being quiet. Whether that's genius or illness or both probably depends on which day you catch him. Martin Shkreli was right that the system was broken. He was right that pharmaceutical pricing in America is a moral catastrophe that costs lives. He was right that the outrage directed to him was selective, convenient, and largely performative from people who had done nothing to fix the problem he had made it impossible to ignore. He was right, and he was also cruel and reckless and corrosive, and he hurt people who had nothing to do with the system he was trying to expose. Both of those things are completely true simultaneously, and that's the part of Martin Shkreli's story that the headlines never had space for, because the headlines needed a villain, clean and simple, and he was more than happy to play that part.